Hello.
Hi.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Oh, wait.
Welcome.
Oh.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome, everyone. Can get almost ready. Okay, welcome, everybody. I'm just going to get the Facebook stream started and we will jump right into it. All right. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another week, another Torah portion. And this week we have a new book, the Sefer Devarim, a new book, the book of Deuteronomy. Trivia question. Anybody know what Deuteronomy means? Don't say Devarim. That doesn't count. So I found out, I actually never knew what it means. I've always wondered how, in general, how the names are translated and whatever, but apparently it comes from an old Greek word, and it means the second law, or like the repeated law. And the Hebrew version of that would be called Mishneh Torah, which is like the repeating of the law, which is actually, according to the commentaries, a lot of what this book is about. So we've already learned almost all of the mitzvahs. And now we're going to enter this whole book. And I want to just get a little perspective of what this book is doing, because most of the mitzvahs that are learned here are repeated. About 2/3 of the mitzvahs that are taught in the entire book of Devarim are repeated. So what is the reason for this, and what's going on here? So I want to just spend a few minutes reading from Art Scroll's introduction to Devarim. If you happen to have a Stone Edition Chumash, it's on page 938, and they discuss a little bit of what this Mishnah Torah is. What is this repetition of the Torah? Sometimes understood as an explanation of the Torah. So all of the commandments were given to Moses at Sinai, or at the tent of meeting during the first year after the Exodus. But the idea is that the mitzvahs were already given. So if they're written here, that doesn't mean they were given now at a later point in time from Sinai, but rather there is some kind of reason why the narrative is being shared now. So Rav Hirsch explains that Devarim is the Jewish people's introduction to the new life that they would live in Israel. So as a nation, the Jewish people are going to go through some serious changes in how their lives are being run. And during all of the time that they were in the desert, they were supported and they were surviving because of miracles, the miracles of the clouds and the miracles of the water and the miracles of the food and the miracles of everything. So now they're going to go to Israel and all of these miracles are going to disappear. They're now going to have to work the land themselves. They're going to have to plow and plant and harvest, and they're going to have to set up a court system and a government. And they would have to make social relationships and a means to provide for and protect the needy and helpless. They're going to be setting up a civilization, essentially, which is not something they're accustomed to, right? The people, this generation that's alive at this point were not the main group of people who left Egypt, but essentially they've never had that. They've been surviving on miracles. So now, in order to go forward with this, they were going to need a lot of faith. They needed to fill up their gas tank with faith and trust and belief in Hashem, and to really believe that Hashem is going to help them, even though there isn't going to be miracles. And we spoke about this idea once in another context here in Torah Talk, that Hashem helps us just as much when he isn't doing an open miracle than when he is doing an open miracle. It's just hard for us to see it. So we're out here, we're struggling, we're working hard, and it's a little harder to attribute our success to Hashem because we can just as easily attribute it to ourselves. Of course, if we had miracles happening, then we would obviously attribute that to a higher source, to a God. But now we're being tested tremendously by having this whole concept of faith, right? There's a whole category in Judaism. One of the most important mitzvot that a person can live and really experience in their lives is emunah. And emunah is the struggle. Emunah is a constant struggle because we don't see Hashem openly very often. Hashem's hand is hidden. So emunah is the struggle to see Hashem where he's hidden anyway, to find glimpses of him in our lives, to find examples of the fact that he's taking care of us, even though that's not openly visible. That is the struggle of emunah, which is a lifetime struggle. The Jewish people are going to have to really build their emunah before they go into the land of Israel, and they need to, work themselves in order to be able to make a livelihood and run their country. So, okay, now they write here that there's 200 laws contained in this book, and 70 are new, meaning they weren't written yet in the Torah, and that means that 130 of them are repeated. Like I said, about 2/3 are actually repeated. This entire book was Moshe's last few weeks. I think it was 36 days before he died that this book starts. Eila hadavarim asher diber Moshe al kol Yisrael. These are the words that Moshe spoke to all of Israel. In his last 36 days, he's going to go through, he's going to review so many of the laws that were already taught. And the focus, according to this perspective, is going to be on the most practical ones that are going to enable them to live this new life, that they need to live this new life. So that's a little bit of what the overview here is. And also uniquely here, Moshe was the speaker, meaning Hashem had taught this to Moshe, and then Moshe, like almost on his own initiative, said, okay, I'm going to share this information now with the Jewish people. But not that Hashem stood there and said, like, in earlier times, it was Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe Lemer, Hashem tells Moshe, tell the Jewish people. Here, Moshe is taking the initiative to go through all of this. Okay, so what is the content here? So we know there's over 200 mitzvahs. We know that most of them are a review. We spoke a little bit about which ones were chosen to be reviewed, maybe the ones that are most practical for this new identity that they were going to be taking on of living a life through their own kind of toil and establishing a civilization and a country and a functioning government and court systems and all these things you'll see even in this parsha speaks about a lot of these things. But there's another very important part of this, and that is rebuke that Moshe was giving. This is a very, very integral part of the book of Devarim, is Moshe is rebuking the Jewish people for all of the sins, or many of the sins that they had done through the times throughout the desert, throughout these years of wandering. And he doesn't say it openly. He doesn't openly criticize and say, you evil people, you did A, B, C, D, E, F, G. He doesn't do it like that. He does it in a very concealed and hidden way. And even in the first verse, there's actually words that almost don't make any sense. It says, the first verse, Elah hadvarim, asher dibar Moshe al kol Yisrael be'ever yarden b'midbar ba'arava. Okay, let's read the English here. These are the words that Moshe speaks to all of Israel on the other side of the Jordan, and it's opposite the wilderness and the Arava and the Sea of Reeds, and it's between Paran and Tophel and Lavan and Hatzerot and Dizahav. And Rashi explains that some of these places don't exist. They're not even real places. They're words that are alluding to different rebuke that Moshe was given. So he was hiding it. And we'll talk about why it was like this veiled rebuke and why he didn't just speak openly. We'll talk about that in a moment. But in the meantime, these words are alluding to different things like, oh, so we're traveling through, and remember we went through Paran, Paran, that the city of Paran, and then all of a sudden the Jewish people are going to remember, oh yeah, I know what happened in Paran. What happened in Paran? That's when we complained about, this thing, and they're going to remember that sin. So this was like the hidden way that Moshe was criticizing the Jewish people. So here, for example, Di Zahav means literally an abundance of gold. That was a reminder of the time that they used the gold that Hashem gave them when they left Egypt, and they made a golden calf out of it. So it's just like one example. And then that's what happens throughout this parsha. So we're going to bullet point through the rest of it like we usually do. I think it's good to always have an overview of just what happened in the parsha before we focus on different aspects of it. So, okay, so we list all of several of the places that we pass through, and these hidden messages in just the names of the places of incidents that happened over the last 40 years. And then there's, so Moshe's like, it almost sounds like he's reminiscing in a way. He's like telling over the stories. He's like, and then we were traveling, and then we said that Moshe can't be the only judge. So then Hashem decided that you're right, there has to be more judges to judge the people. So there's like a little bit about judges and the system of judging in Judaism, which we'll get to if we have time near the end. And then there was the mission of the spies to go out and spy the land and the sin that was done there. And there's some discussion about that. And then they passed through, and there was different nations that were attacking them. There was the incident in Moab. There was the sin of the women. I think there's recounted also the women who would entice the men to sin. And then finally Hashem says, okay, now you're going to head towards the land. You're going to head towards Israel. There's different nations that you're going to have to declare war with along the way, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally ending with the fact that Reuven and Gad and half of the tribe of Menashe wanted an inheritance on the other side of the Jordan River, which was actually talked about last week. I didn't have time to get to it. I'm actually not going to have time to get to that topic today, but all of this is recounted. This is Moshe saying over the story. Within this, there are a couple of mitzvos, only 2 mitzvos in this parsha, and that is the mitzvos related to judges, which, like I said, hopefully we'll get to. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about a couple of things here. So first of all, I just find it fascinating, just a very small insight here. In the first verse, it says, these are the things that Moshe said to Israel on the other side of the Jordan. What do you mean the other side of the Jordan? What does that mean, the other side? Who refers to something as the other side? If you're in a city, you can say the other side. If you're in Jacksonville, you can say the other side of the St. Johns River, or you could say, if you're at the beach, you could say the other side of the ocean. The other side means you're here, and that's like the non-important side, so to speak. So here, we're referring to the place that the Jewish people are as basically the wrong side, the other side of the Jordan. The Jewish people have never been in the land of Israel. It's so odd that they're referring to the place that they're currently standing as the other side. What do you mean? This is the side. This is the side that they're on. Israel, which they're trying to get to, that's the one that's on the other side. That's really how a normal person would refer to things in terms of where you are and where you're headed and what's here and what's there. This doesn't really make sense. And just a small insider, it reminds me that we're always on the wrong side of Israel if we're outside of Israel. The Jewish people's home is Israel. Even though they had never entered the land yet, the Jewish people's home is always going to be the land of Israel. And for as long as they're not in Israel, they're on the wrong side of the river. They're on the other side of the Jordan River if they're not actually in the land of Israel. What does it mean? How do you translate the word abroad in Hebrew, in modern Ivrit? Abroad. Abroad is translated as chutz la'aretz, as chul. They call it chul, it's like abbreviation, chutz la'aretz. It means outside the land. From the perspective of Israel, anything that's outside of Israel is just one thing. It's outside of Israel. There's two places on planet Earth, okay? One is Israel and one is outside of Israel. That's the Jewish perspective. So this is what the Jewish people are experiencing here. Yes, they've never been into Israel, but for as long as they're not there, they're on the other side. They're on the wrong side of the Jordan River, and their goal, their eyes, their perspective, their plans and hopes and dreams is going into the right side of the river to go inherit the land of Israel. Okay, so I mentioned here that Moshe gave this kind of rebuke in a veiled way, in a hidden way. So let's talk about a little bit of why he did that. So I want to read here from the Kli Yakar. He has a bit of a discussion. I'm not going to get into all of it, but I just want to pinpoint one takeaway that he has, which is, I think, so incredible. He says, we learn from here. We learn from the way that Moshe gave rebuke to the Jewish people, the proper way to rebuke someone. And what is that? Moshe is not only teaching people the rebuke that he was giving them, he was teaching them how to give rebuke by doing it the way he did it. Anybody who wants to help another Jew, okay, you want to rebuke another Jew. And of course, the context of rebuke here is rebuke out of love, rebuke because we authentically want to help somebody grow without any ulterior motives or ego or anything, or jealousy or hatred or anything like that. Anybody who wants to do that, and he wants his words to be heard and be accepted and not be spit out and not have people be turned off by what he's saying. Okay, so this is a major lesson here to anybody. This could be to any rabbi who wants to rebuke, his congregation or his community or whatever, but even any kind of Jew who wants to help another Jew. Yochicham beremez velo beferish, should give rebuke through hinting and not explicitly, not straight up in a harsh way. You did this, you should not have done this, one cannot do this, this is not the way to live, this is not the way a Torah Jew behaves, but rather to hint it out in a way that people won't understand necessarily what his message is unless they are the intended recipient. Okay, that's a high bar. So you're talking to a community or whatever, and you have a message you want to give to a few people, and you'll say it in this concealed way. And the people who the message is for will know exactly what that message is. And they will receive it in a way that they will accept it. Avo b'tochacha megula mistama yivat. This what a blanket statement to make. But with a open, explicit rebuke, chances are it will not be received. Okay, that is pretty strong words from the Kli Yakar. Not, oh, it's better, it's better to hint it and don't be so strong. If you do it in a strong way, chances are it's not going to be well received. And I think we could relate to that. I mean, who likes to be rebuked? I don't know anybody who likes to be rebuked. Anytime anybody would tell me, oh, you shouldn't have done that, don't do that, the first thing I do is get defensive about it. Whatever kind of perspective could come through my brain. No, I didn't do it, or you didn't understand what I do, or who are you to give me this rebuke? Or, us humans, we have all kinds of reasons why we don't want to listen to something. So the second it's like in an open, direct way, it's like opening confrontation. And then all of a sudden we're not interested. Who is this guy? He's going to tell me what I did wrong, what I did right. We have all kinds of excuses. So if we want to help another Jew, if we want to help encourage someone to do better, the way to do that is by hiding what we're saying, by just talking about the idea, talking about the topic, talking about it in a general way, or hinting at it in a way that the people who the message is for will get the message. And by the way, them getting the message doesn't mean that they now are going through their minds, okay, this person or rabbi or whatever, he wants to tell me a message, and this is the rebuke he wants to give me, and he's giving it in a concealed way. Even that might cause people to not be interested in it. The point is that the person doesn't even realize that you're there to give them rebuke. You're just sharing some idea, and that's inspiring them on their own to take a message that will help them grow. It's like, oh yeah, the rabbi spoke about this idea. He wasn't talking to me, and he wasn't upset, and he wasn't saying that we were doing something wrong, but he did mention, the value of, whatever, and I do struggle in that area. Maybe this could cause some kind of inspiration. So this is one of the messages that Moshe was giving, not only the rebuke itself, but also the lesson to all of us of what the proper way is to actually give rebuke. Okay, any thoughts on that before we move on to another area? Okay. So now I want to talk a little bit about the judges, about Jewish judges. So, judges have been in the news recently after the Supreme Court issued their major decision of overturning Roe v. Wade. There were protests not only outside the Supreme Court and in Washington and DC and in all kinds of places around the country, but there was also a lot of protests outside the justices' homes. And there were threats that were issued to the various justices. Even one, they reported it in the news as like an attempt on one of their lives. I don't know what stage of the attempt a person was arrested in, but regardless, when it came to protesting outside the justices' homes, that is actually a red line that, according to U.S. law, cannot be passed. So America doesn't frown on protesting. It's a fundamental part of the way our country is structured, is the right of people to protest, but is actually not legal to protest outside Supreme Court justice's home. So there was like discussion about that because there were protests and the police didn't really do everything, and they didn't really arrest the people, and there's all kinds of fights about it. But suffice it to say, it's a dangerous job to be a judge. Certainly in the Supreme Court, which is like the highest court in the land, and their verdicts are top of the chain and can't be overturned by a higher court. They're the top of the system. So how are they protected? So they're protected very well. They're protected with 24/7 security, like the president. Probably not, maybe not to the level of the president, but they are given 24/7 security while they're at work and even while they're at home. And after all these protests happened, I saw that they passed a law extending that security to their immediate family members as well. So that's how Supreme Court justices are protected. They're given this kind of security. what protection was given to Jewish judges? Okay, when the Jews had control over the land of Israel, when we were in Eretz Yisrael, when we had a Beis HaMikdash, the Torah has many instructions of how we structure our court system and how that functions. But every single judge has enemies. In almost every single verdict that a judge will rule, somebody's mad at him, right? Almost every time, somebody's going to be upset at the judge. The loser. There's a loser in every single court case. So the loser is going to be upset at the judge. What is the security that they're given? I was summoned to jury duty this week here in Jacksonville, and I went downtown. There was a lot of security in that building. Let me tell you, a lot of security in that building. I ended up not being actually called to a trial. They didn't need me, so I got off on that. But there are police in every room and every hallway. What were the Jewish judges given? So the Torah tells us, it's in chapter 1, verse 17. Okay, first here is the instruction, you shall not show favoritism in judgment, small and great alike shall you hear. You shall not tremble before any man, for the judgment is God's. Okay? You shall not tremble before any man. A judge should not be scared about issuing his verdict. A Jewish judge is instructed with a positive commandment. Okay, this is one of the 613 commandments. This one's only for a judge. A judge shall not tremble before any person. How's that for security? The Torah is not telling him, here's your security team. The Torah is telling him, don't be scared. Just don't be scared. Just do not be scared, because judgment is mine. Judgment is God's. You are carrying out my duties. You're God's, man on the ground to issue justice. Do not be scared. So the question is that enough? Like, what are you saying that the judge should be willing to risk giving up his life? Let's say he's got a murder case, and he knows that the murderer, the accused, he's part of a mafia, and if he issues a verdict that he's going to go to jail for life, or actually if it was a murder in the times of the Torah and there was proper witnesses and everything, he would be killed. He can know that man is after him for his life, or maybe his family and friends or mafia team will come back and go after the judge's life. That's a very scary business to be in. So don't be scared. Okay, what do you mean don't be scared? Am I going to die? Is the judge going to die now? There's a chance the judge is going to die. And if so, we know we have a tradition over value of life versus value of mitzvahs. The Torah is not ambiguous about this. It's a very clear-cut concept in Judaism. There are 3 things a Jew must give his life over for. If he's forced to do idolatry, if he's forced to murder, and immorality and adultery. Okay, those are the 3 things that a Jew must say, no, I'd rather die than commit one of these sins. There's no 4th that says judges need to be willing to give up their life to be able to judge properly. So what's going on here? Why is the Torah telling him just don't be scared? So I want to read for you a little bit. We're going to open up the book of mitzvahs. So we're going to open up to this mitzvah. And let's see what kind of insights we could get into this. So interesting, the Sefer HaMitzvos that I'm reading here, he goes through all the mitzvahs, and then he'll tell you in every one the underlying purpose of the mitzvah. What is the underlying purpose of every mitzvah? Which means in a more logical way, because the Torah doesn't say the reasons for all mitzvahs. It does in a handful of them. The Sefer HaMitzvos tells us a deeper way that we can connect to a reason that we can understand. And what does he say here? He says 6 words. Shoresh mitzvah zu, the underlying purpose of this mitzvah, haseichel meid alav, is something which common sense can testify for. He's not giving us a reason. the concept that a judge should not be scared to do his judgment is basic logic. What does that mean, basic logic? If a judge is going to allow himself to be intimidated by someone, by powerful people, justice would never be served. A very simple concept. I guess, if the Supreme Court justices, or really old judges around the country, felt that there was like serious threat to their life, and then they wouldn't be able to judge properly. So the Supreme Court will have their protection. They could rely on the security detail that they're given. When it comes to Jewish judges also, if a Jewish judge will be intimidated, then he's not going to be able to judge properly. So in order to have this system, we need to make sure that he's not going to be scared and leave a court case. Okay, then there's a discussion about whether he has the right to refuse a case before he starts it. So everybody will agree that if a judge starts a case and then all of a sudden, the person who's very dangerous and has his mafia connections, we see it starting to go against him, then the judge definitely cannot say, okay, I'm done here. I don't want to do this judgment because it looks like that guy is going to be guilty and I might be at risk. That for sure he can't do. There's a discussion whether he could refuse a case entirely and pass it on to somebody else. But regardless, we have this question that it appears, according to the understanding of Maimonides, the Rambam, and the Chinuch that we just read, that even if there's credible threats to his life, the Torah is commanding him not to be scared. But we know that as a general rule, one does not need to risk his life for the sake of observing a mitzvah, with those three exceptions. So I'm going to read here the answer they give from Rabbi Aaron Wolkin. He wrote a book called Choshen Aaron. He says, well, normally the Torah does not require one to give up his life in order to avoid transgressing a mitzvah. Here, the verse specifically demands, Leisaguru v'bnei ish, you shall not tremble before any man. Thus, there is a specific mandate that a judge must issue a ruling in the face of any threat. So how do we understand that? Again, how do we understand why he would need to do this? I should just say that the Rambam, Maimonides, and the Chinuch are the one who have this opinion. There are others that do argue with them, and they say that it's not referring to cases of a credible threat to the life of the judge. It's referring to more minor issues, that he's going to get some, verbal abuse from the defendant or whatever, or maybe threat to his finances or his fields or something like that, but maybe not necessarily to his life. But according to the Chinuch and the Rambam, it's to his life also. So they explain here, perhaps we can understand this matter better if we recognize the ultimate role of a judge. A judge does not merely issue judgment, nor is he simply an arbiter of the law. Rather, he serves as the preserver of justice. Thus, as Rajba writes, if judges allow themselves to become intimidated by the people that they are judging, then anybody could make violent threats and the mighty would never be brought to justice, right? Justice would only be for the weak and the afraid. But anybody who's going to toughen up against a judge and issue threats is not going to be brought to justice. This would ultimately lead to a breakdown of the entire system of law and order. A judge is thus hardly different from a soldier going to battle, whose very position requires him to enter into situations of danger. Therefore, just as the Rambam writes that a soldier who fails to perform his duty, meaning even to the degree of risking his life, is considered to have spilled the blood of the entire nation, so too a judge who fails in his mission is responsible for the lack of peace and justice that will ensue as a result of this failure. And just as a soldier who stands courageously in battle with the sole intention of sanctifying the name of Hashem is assured that no harm or evil will befall him, so too the judge who puts all personal motives aside and faithfully fulfills his duty will merit Hashem's protection and will see no harm. So really incredible perspective here of how the judge has so much at stake, so much at stake. I don't want to get political, but we've seen precedent, even recently in the United States, of the danger and lawlessness that could occur if a judge decides to be too lenient. If a judge decides that they're not in the mood of prosecuting different people or different types of crimes and lets things off the hook we need to realize that it's much more than that particular person that is in play here. Because if a judge creates an atmosphere that people can get away with things, that people will not be brought to justice, he will have a responsibility for the fallout of that. That's what is being taught to the Jewish judge. So if a Jewish judge would be scared and say, no, I'm not going to, persecute this types of crime or these type of people because I'm too scared of it or whatever, the fallout from that could be horrific. It could be total lawlessness. And lawlessness equals death, unfortunately. Unfortunately, so much crime, crime escalates to violent crime, which escalates to death so often. We see that, unfortunately, all across the country. So the biggest disservice that a judge could do is to let someone off the hook who needs to be punished properly and then erode the whole system of justice in the city. So therefore, the judge, the Jewish judge, he's being tasked with something much bigger than just one particular case and one particular defendant and who's going to be, what is the result of this case going to be? It's really the integrity of the entire system of government of the Jewish people in the land of Israel that's at play here. And that's why, according to the Chinuch and the Rambam, the judge does indeed have to go so far as to risk his own life to be able to have the courage to say the judgment as it is. And it says here, one last thought, Rabbeinu Yonah explains that the prohibition of you shall not tremble before any man requires the judge to have trust in Hashem and believe that by fulfilling his mitzvah to judge properly, no harm will come this way. And that's why it ends off. The Torah says, Ki hamishpat lelokim hu, for judgment is God's, and therefore you have nothing to fear. So ultimately, the judge has nothing to be scared of. Hashem is assuring him the protection that he needs, even if he doesn't have the secret service around him. Hashem is saying, you're here, you're carrying out my mission in this world to bring justice in this world and to ensure a functioning society and system of government and order. And therefore, do not fear, trust in Hashem, do not fear people. Hashem will be at his defense and make sure that he comes to no harm. I think on a broader message as well, even for us who are not judges, I think there's still a message here that when we're uncompromising in following the word of Hashem and we're following the Torah without cutting corners, without trying to take exceptions for various reasons, for any reason, okay, even nothing to do with this judgment and threat of death or anything, but if we stay strong and we stay true to the Torah, Hashem is assuring us that we have nothing to be afraid of. Lemishpatul Hashem, because the judgment is for Hashem, and if we're doing things for the sake of heaven, there's no person in this world that we need to be scared of. It reminded me of the, forgetting now where the original source of this is, but it's certainly brought down in books of Musar, the idea that one should not, I think it's in Pirkei Avos, that one should not be embarrassed of his Judaism. And it's very easy to be embarrassed of your Judaism. You dress a certain way and go to certain places. Sometimes it could even be wearing a kippah and going into certain places, or having to ask your boss to get a day off yet again because of another Jewish holiday, or have to decline non-kosher food in front of other people. I mean, the list is endless of times that we could be put into an embarrassing situation. And we're taught not to be embarrassed, to push forth anyway. Don't worry about what people will think of us, because the biggest thing that will hold us back is if we're scared of what people will think of our Jewish observance. And I think, we can all think about this on our own. How many times have we held back from doing a mitzvah because we were concerned about how somebody will look at us? And depending on where we are and who our surrounding is, everybody could have this differently. For some people, it could be like, oh, if I do this, people are going to look at me as like this, radical, ultra-Orthodox, whatever, because I'm doing this mitzvah. Or it could be in another scenario that people will think you're funny or doing something unusual or weird for another reason. Everybody could, maybe relate to this a different way. But ultimately, we need to do what Hashem wants us to do, and Hashem will have our back, and Hashem will take care of us. So that is all for this week's Parsha. Any thoughts, questions, comments on any of this?
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good to see you all. Next
Thank
week, same
you.
time.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Rabbi. Very good. Thank you.